In the soft, sterile glow of a television studio, Kouri Richins clutched a colorful children's book to her chest, a manual for grieving hearts entitled "Are You With Me?" She spoke to the cameras with a practiced maternal tenderness, describing how to guide a child through the suffocating darkness of losing a father. But while the audience saw a mourning widow, investigators were staring at a toxicology report that whispered a different story. It was a narrative written in the residue of a celebratory Moscow mule, one spiked with 5 times the lethal dose of illicit fentanyl. This is the portrait of a woman who didn't just write a book about death, she allegedly choreographed it. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more cases. This helps us a lot. Thank you. To understand the unraveling of the Richins family, one must first look at the rugged, high-altitude landscape of Kamas, Utah. This is a place where the air is thin, the winters are punishing, and the culture is built on the bedrock of industry and legacy. Eric Richins was the embodiment of that local spirit, born into a respected family. He was a man of the earth, a hunter, a horseman, and a businessman who understood that success was carved out of hard work. Eric wasn't just a face in the crowd, he was a pillar of the community, known for his massive frame, his booming laugh, and a work ethic that seemed almost inexhaustible. He had built C&E stone masonry from the ground up, transforming it into a premier operation that provided the literal foundations for the luxury estates dotting the Wasatch Mountains. To his friends, Eric was the guy you called when a truck was stuck in the snow or when you needed a hand hauling hay. He was a father who lived for his 3 young sons, teaching them the nuances of the outdoors and the value of a man's word. In the early 2000s, the trajectory of Eric's life intersected with Kouri Richins. On the surface, they seemed like the quintessential power couple of the modern West. Kouri was striking, ambitious, and possessed a kinetic energy that matched Eric's drive. While Eric dealt in the heavy, tactile world of stone and mortar, Kouri was drawn to the fast-paced, high-stakes arena of real estate. She was a woman who didn't just want a seat at the table, she wanted to own the room. Friends described their early years as a whirlwind of shared goals and mutual admiration. They were building a life that looked perfect on paper, a beautiful home, a growing family, and a social circle that saw them as the gold standard for success in Summit County. Kouri was the social engine of the family, the one who organized the parties and managed the public-facing image of their success. She took pride in her role as a mother, often seen at her son's sporting events, cheering with an intensity that signaled her commitment to the Richins brand. But as the years progressed, the Richins brand began to show microscopic fractures hidden beneath layers of expensive finishes and social media posts. The tension wasn't rooted in a lack of affection, but in a fundamental disagreement over the meaning of wealth. Eric was a conservative provider. He believed in the security of land, the stability of his business, and the long-term protection of his children's inheritance. He viewed money as a shield. Kouri, however, viewed money as a ladder. Her ambition in real estate began to take on a desperate, almost manic quality. She was constantly hunting for the next big flip, the next multi-million-dollar mansion that would catapult her into a different social stratum. She began taking massive financial risks, moves that Eric found increasingly reckless. While Eric was content with the slow, steady growth of his masonry empire, Kouri was playing a high-frequency game of musical chairs with their credit and assets. By 2020, the atmosphere inside the Richins home had shifted from collaborative to transactional. Eric started noticing discrepancies in their accounts, small at first, then glaring. He discovered that Kouri had been dipping into his personal funds and business accounts to sustain her real estate ventures, often without his knowledge. This wasn't just a marital spat over spending, it was a betrayal of the trust Eric placed in his partner. He was a man who believed in the sanctity of a contract, and he realized his wife was rewriting theirs in the dark. He confided in his sisters and his closest friends that he felt his life was becoming a series of managed illusions. The man who could move tons of stone with his bare hands felt powerless against the shifting shadows of his own household. The psychological toll on Eric was profound. He began to question not just his finances, but his physical safety. Those close to him recalled a chilling pattern of mystery illnesses that seemed to coincide with meals or drinks prepared by Kouri. There was the time in Greece, where a romantic dinner ended with Eric violently ill, convinced he had been poisoned. Then there was the Valentine's Day incident, shortly before his death, where a simple sandwich left him unable to breathe, his throat closing, his body rejecting something hidden in the bread. He told his sister that he suspected Kouri was trying to kill him, a statement so extreme, so outside the realm of Kamas reality, that it was treated as a dark hyperbole, until it wasn't. Despite his growing fear, Eric remained. He stayed for the 3 boys who carried his name and his eyes. He stayed because he believed he could outmaneuver the threat if he just kept his head down and his eyes open. He didn't realize that the woman he shared a bed with had already moved past the point of negotiation. She wasn't just looking for a way out of the marriage, she was looking for a way to inherit the life Eric had built, without the man who stood in her way. As the calendar turned to 2022, Kouri's financial pressure reached a boiling point. She had set her sights on a gargantuan 20,000 square foot unfinished mansion, a project that required millions Eric was unwilling to provide. The stage was being set for a final confrontation, one where the weapons wouldn't be words or divorce papers, but something far more silent and far more lethal. Kouri began reaching out to contacts in the underbelly of the local drug scene, asking for something strong, something like the Michael Jackson stuff. She was no longer just a realtor or a mother or a wife. She had become an architect of a different kind, designing a tragedy that she believed she could sell to the world as a heartbreak. By early 2022, the Grand House in Kamas had become a pressure cooker of unspoken accusations and hidden ledgers. The central point of contention was a massive, unfinished 20,000 square foot mansion located in nearby Heber City. To Kouri, this was the crown jewel of her real estate portfolio, a multi-million-dollar flip that would define her career. To Eric, it was a financial abyss. He saw the numbers, and they didn't make sense. He refused to sign the papers that would have put his family's stability at risk to fund his wife's obsession with grandeur. This disagreement wasn't just about a house, it was a battle for the steering wheel of their lives. Eric had discovered that Kouri had already taken out at least $250,000 in secret loans, and that she had been siphoning money from his business accounts to keep her own ventures afloat. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a documented reality that Eric began to lay out for his closest confidants. The psychological landscape of their marriage was even more treacherous. Eric Richins was a man of significant physical stature, a former athlete used to controlling his environment, yet he found himself increasingly terrified of the very food and drink served in his own home. He told his family that he believed Kouri was trying to kill him. This wasn't a sudden, paranoid delusion, but a conclusion drawn from a series of near-fatal encounters. Years earlier, during a trip to Greece, Eric became violently ill after a dinner with Kouri, describing a sensation of his body being hijacked from the inside. Then came the incident that changed everything. Valentine's Day, 2022. Kouri had prepared a sandwich for Eric, a seemingly mundane gesture of affection. Within minutes of eating it, Eric broke out in hives and began to suffocate. He was forced to use his son's EpiPen and take a massive dose of Benadryl to survive. He didn't call 911, but he called his sister. He told her, "I think my wife just tried to poison me." In the wake of that Valentine's Day scare, Eric took a step that would ultimately provide the roadmap for the police investigation. He secretly changed his will and his power of attorney. He removed Kouri as the beneficiary of his estate and his multi-million-dollar life insurance policy, instead naming his sister, Kouri Richins Benson, as the trustee. He didn't tell Kouri. He lived in a house where he slept with one eye open, playing the role of the devoted husband while quietly building a legal fortress to protect his children from their own mother. He even told his family that if anything happened to him, they should look nowhere else but at his wife. He was a man living a double life, waiting for the right moment to serve divorce papers, hoping he could survive long enough to reach the exit. While Eric was fortifying his legal defenses, Kouri was busy navigating the local drug market. Investigators would later discover a series of communications between Kouri and a woman identified as CL, a housekeeper who had worked for the family. In late January 2022, Kouri reached out with a specific and chilling request. She didn't want recreational drugs, she asked for some of the Michael Jackson stuff. She was looking for illicit fentanyl, a synthetic opioid 50 times stronger than heroin. The digital trail showed a persistent, calculated pursuit. On February 11th, just 3 days before Eric's throat closed up from that Valentine's Day sandwich, Kouri met CL at a convenience store and paid $900 for 30 fentanyl pills. When Eric didn't die from the sandwich, Kouri didn't stop. She reached out to CL again 2 weeks later, claiming that Eric wanted something stronger for a back injury. She purchased another $900 worth of pills, a lethal pharmacy hidden within the walls of a family home. The irony of the situation was staggering. Kouri was maintaining a public image of a high-achieving, loving wife, while privately managing the logistics of a chemical assassination. She was balancing the books of her real estate business with the one hand and counting out black market pills with the other. The financial pressure was immense. She was on the hook for millions of dollars for the Haber City mansion, and the closing date was looming. Eric was the only obstacle between her and the liquid assets she needed to save her reputation and her business. In her mind, the marriage had become a zero-sum game. For Kouri to win, for her to become the mogul she envisioned, Eric had to disappear. As February bled into March, the tension reached its zenith. Kouri was convinced she could orchestrate a natural death, a heart attack, an accidental overdose, something that wouldn't invite the scrutiny of the law. She believed her status in the community and her role as a mother would provide an impenetrable shield of sympathy. She didn't realize that Eric had already spoken from beyond the grave through the changes in his will. She didn't realize that the mystery illnesses had left a trail of witnesses who were already waiting for the other shoe to drop. The facade was perfect, the lawn was manicured, and the children were tucked into bed. But inside the master suite, a Moscow mule was being prepared that would shatter the silence of Kamaz forever. Kouri wasn't just a wife anymore. She was an apex predator. Waiting for the moment, Eric let his guard down. One celebratory drink at a time. The evening of March 3rd, 2022, was supposed to be a milestone of professional triumph for Kouri Richins. Earlier that day, she had finally closed the deal on the massive Haber City mansion, the 20,000 square foot project she believed would secure her legacy as a real estate titan. Despite Eric's vocal opposition and his refusal to put his signature on the financing, Kouri had pushed the transaction through. It was a victory won in the shadows of their financial dispute, and she decided that such an achievement required a celebration. The atmosphere in the house was deceptively calm as the sun set over the Wasatch Mountains. To any observer, they were just another successful family settling in for the night, but Eric was stepping into a trap meticulously laid over the preceding weeks. The celebration took place in the intimacy of their master bedroom. Kouri prepared a drink for Eric, a Moscow mule, served in a traditional copper mug. It was a drink Eric enjoyed, and in the context of their victory, he had no reason to refuse it. However, investigators would later allege that this specific cocktail was the delivery system for a lethal payload. Hidden within the ginger beer and lime was a massive concentration of illicit fentanyl. Eric, a man of 39 in the prime of his life, drank the mixture and went to bed. Kouri told investigators that she left the bedroom to sleep in one of the children's rooms because one of their sons was having a night terror. She claimed she stayed there for hours, tucked away from her husband as the chemical storm began to ravage his system. At approximately 3:22 a.m. on March 4th, the silence of the Richins home was shattered by a 911 call. Kouri's voice on the line was frantic as she reported that she had returned to the master bedroom and found Eric cold to the touch. When the first responders arrived at the scene, they found Kouri performing CPR on Eric's large frame, which was sprawled on the floor at the foot of the bed. The air in the room was heavy with the clinical scent of emergency intervention as paramedics took over, but it was immediately clear that Eric was gone. His body was stiff, his skin was a mottled porcelain gray. Despite their best efforts, there was no spark of life to be found. The man who had spent his day moving stone was now as cold and immovable as the materials he worked with. The initial scene was processed with a sense of routine tragedy. Sudden deaths of young, healthy men are always jarring, but Kouri's performance was convincing. She played the part of the hysterical, grieving widow with a haunting precision. She told officers that Eric had no known health issues other than some minor back pain and that he had gone to sleep feeling fine. She mentioned the celebration drink, framing it as a sweet moment between a husband and wife. However, even in those first few hours, the narrative began to fray. Detectives noticed that Kouri's phone, which she claimed she had left in the master bedroom while sleeping in the kids' room, showed a flurry of activity during the time she was supposed to be asleep. There were sent and received messages, and most tellingly, a series of deleted entries that suggested someone was frantically scrubbing their digital footprint while Eric lay dying just feet away. The medical examiner's arrival marked the beginning of the end for Kouri's facade. While she was telling the community about the sudden heart attack that took her husband, the autopsy was revealing a much more violent truth. There was no evidence of a cardiac event. Eric's heart was strong and healthy. Instead, the toxicology screen came back with a result that sent shockwaves through the Summit County Sheriff's Office. Eric Richins' blood contained 5 times the lethal dosage of fentanyl. Crucially, the drug was ingested orally, meaning it hadn't been injected or snorted. It had been swallowed, likely hidden in a drink or food. The timeline was equally damning. The concentration in his stomach suggested the drug was consumed shortly before his death. As the sun rose over Kamaz on March 4th, the community mourned a local hero, but the investigators were looking at Kouri with fresh, suspicious eyes. They looked at the copper mug, they looked at the financial records, and they remembered the words Eric had shared with his family just weeks prior. "If I die, it wasn't an accident." The incident wasn't just a single night of horror. It was the culmination of a weeks-long pharmaceutical hunt. The 20 fentanyl pills Kouri had purchased in late February were missing, and Eric was dead of an overdose he had no history of seeking. Kouri's behavior in the immediate aftermath of the death was also telling. Within hours of Eric being pronounced dead, and before his body was even cold, Kouri was seen celebrating. Neighbors and family members reported that she threw a party at her home to mark the closing of the Heber City mansion, the very deal Eric had died opposing. There was music, there was laughter, and there was a chilling lack of the devastation she would later peddle to the media. She acted like a woman who had just been unburdened, unaware that the police were already documenting the CL connection in the deleted texts. The scene in the bedroom that night was a masterclass in domestic horror. Eric, trusting his wife to share a drink in the safety of their home, likely felt the first wave of the opioid's effects as a heavy, creeping lethargy. As the fentanyl suppressed his respiratory system, his breathing would have slowed to a crawl, his brain starving for oxygen while he lay paralyzed in the dark. Kouri, meanwhile, was allegedly occupied with her phone, managing the narrative before it had even begun. She didn't call for help when the breathing became labored. She waited until the life had completely drained out of him, ensuring that when the paramedics arrived, they would find a corpse, not a patient. The Moscow Mule became the signature of her crime, a sharp, cold, and acidic cocktail that served as the final curtain for Kouri Richins. While the town of Kamaz prepared for a funeral, Kouri was preparing for a book tour. She was already mentally transitioning from widow to author, a pivot so ghoulish it would eventually captivate the entire country. But beneath the grief and the colorful illustrations of her book, the shadow of that copper mug loomed large. The death of Kouri Richins was no longer a mystery to the men in suits. It was a homicide investigation waiting for the final piece of digital evidence to click into place. Eric had left the world exactly as he feared he would, at the hands of the woman who claimed to be his soulmate, but he had left enough breadcrumbs in his changed will and his whispered warnings to ensure that Kouri's perfect crime would eventually lead her to a prison cell. In the months following Eric's death, Kouri Richins began a transformation that was as swift as it was unsettling. While the community of Kamaz was still processing the loss of a local titan, Kouri was already curating a new identity. She didn't just step into the role of a grieving widow, she turned her grief into a brand. This was the birth of the grieving widow author, a persona designed to garner maximum public sympathy while serving as a smokescreen for the ongoing homicide investigation. Kouri announced that she had written a children's book titled Are You With Me?, a vibrantly illustrated guide meant to help her 3 sons, and children everywhere, navigate the incomprehensible pain of losing a father. The book featured a father with angel wings watching over his children from the sky, a sentimental, almost saccharine depiction of the man she had allegedly silenced with a copper mug. The marketing of the book was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Kouri didn't just sell a story, she sold her own tragedy. She began making the rounds on local media, most notably appearing on the lifestyle show Good Things Utah, sitting on a plush sofa, wearing a warm, maternal smile. She spoke to the hosts about the sudden and unexpected passing of her husband. She described Eric as the love of her life and the bedrock of their family. She looked into the camera with moist eyes and explained that her children's questions about their father's whereabouts were the inspiration for the book. It was a performance that captivated the audience, a portrait of a resilient mother finding light in the darkest of times. But to Eric's family, watching from the sidelines, the display was ghoulish. They saw a woman using their brother's death to sell copies of a book, while the toxicology report was already quietly being discussed in the halls of justice. The dissonance between Kouri's public saintly image and her private actions was staggering. While she was on television promoting healing and peace, she was engaged in a brutal, scorched earth legal battle with Eric's sisters. The central point of the conflict was Eric's estate and his multi-million-dollar life insurance policy. Kouri was stunned to discover that Eric had secretly moved his assets into a trust and named his sister, Kouri Richins Benson, as the trustee. The woman who thought she was about to inherit a fortune found herself locked out of the vault. Her reaction wasn't one of a mourning spouse, it was one of a thwarted opportunist. She sued the family, attempting to overturn the trust and claim the house and the money she felt she was owed. The legal filings were cold and transactional, a sharp contrast to the gentle prose of her children's book. Kouri's use of her children during this period was particularly scrutinized by investigators. The 3 boys became props in her narrative of the brave widow. She frequently posted photos of them on social media, often in connection with the book, using their genuine grief to bolster her public standing. It was a strategy of human shields. Who would dare to accuse a mother of 3 of such a heinous crime when she was so publicly dedicated to their emotional recovery? This was the core paradox of the case. The woman who had allegedly orphaned her children was now presenting herself as their only salvation. She was building a fortress of public opinion, believing that if she could make the world fall in love with her story, the police would never be able to touch her. Behind the scenes, however, the financial walls were closing in. The Heber City mansion, the 20,000 square foot obsession that had driven the final wedge between Kouri and Eric, was now a liability. Without Eric's income and the insurance payout she had expected, Kouri was drowning in debt. The author was broke. Her real estate business was a shell, and the secret loans she had taken out were coming due. This financial desperation likely fueled the intensity of her book promotion. She needed a new source of revenue, and she needed it fast. The irony was palpable. She had killed for money, and now she was selling the story of that death just to stay afloat. The community's reaction to Kouri's sudden fame was a mixture of awe and growing unease. While many were moved by her story, those who had known Eric closely began to notice the inconsistencies. They remembered his mystery illnesses. They remembered his fear. Rumors began to circulate in the local diners and stables of Kamaz. Whispers that the perfect Utah widow wasn't as perfect as she seemed. The fear in the town began to shift from the tragedy of Eric's death to the chilling possibility that a predator was living in their midst, signing books and smiling for the cameras. As the investigation into Eric's death deepened, the police were documenting every public appearance Kouri made. They saw the Good Things Utah segment. They read the book. They watched her use her children to sell a lie. To the detectives, every smile Kouri gave to a reporter was a piece of evidence, a demonstration of her capacity for deception. They were looking at a woman who could compartmentalize a cold-blooded murder and a career as a children's author without breaking a sweat. The performance was flawless. But in the age of digital forensics and toxicological certainty, even the best actors eventually run out of stage. Kouri Richins believed she was writing the final chapter of her life as a successful mogul and beloved author, unaware that the police were about to provide a plot twist that would end her career, her freedom, and the narrative she had worked so hard to maintain. The investigation into the death of Eric Richins was never a sprint. It was a grueling marathon of digital reconstruction and old-fashioned legwork. While Kouri was busy on her media tour, promoting a book that painted her as a beacon of maternal strength, a specialized team of detectives in Summit County was quietly dismantling her life. One bite at a time, the cornerstone of the case was the toxicology report, which had transformed a sudden medical event into a blatant homicide. Eric didn't just have fentanyl in his system, he was saturated with it. The concentration, 5 times the lethal dose, was so high that it ruled out any possibility of accidental ingestion or recreational use gone wrong. This was a hot dose, a kill shot delivered through the gastrointestinal tract. With the cause of death established, the detectives turned their focus to the how and where. They began a forensic audit of every electronic device in the Richins household. This is where Kouri's carefully constructed narrative began to bleed. Modern smartphones are the ultimate witnesses, and Kouri's iPhone was shouting truths she thought she had buried. Investigators utilized advanced software to recover a series of deleted text messages, a digital graveyard of her secret life. These messages revealed a frantic, month-long pursuit of illicit substances. The search history on her devices was even more damning, showing queries about life insurance payouts, the lethal properties of fentanyl, and how to delete messages permanently. She wasn't just a grieving widow, she was a student of the dark arts of chemical disposal. The breakthrough that would eventually lead to the handcuffs came in the form of a witness identified in court documents as CL. This was the housekeeper, a woman who had worked for the Richins family and had her own history with the local drug trade. When confronted with the evidence from Kouri's phone, CL broke. She admitted to investigators that Kouri had approached her in early 2022 with a specific request. She needed some of the Michael Jackson stuff. For anyone familiar with celebrity toxicology, this was a clear reference to propofol or powerful synthetic opioids. Between January and February, Kouri had allegedly met CL at least twice to purchase fentanyl pills. Each transaction involved hundreds of dollars in cash, handed over in parking lots while the children were likely at home. One of these meetings happened just days before Eric's near-death experience on Valentine's Day. The Valentine's Day incident now sat at the center of a pattern of attempted murder. Detectives interviewed Eric's family and friends, and a consistent story emerged. Eric had told his sister that he felt his body shutting down after eating a sandwich Kouri had made for him. He had found his son's EpiPen and self-administered it to keep his airway open. He didn't tell the police then, but he told his inner circle. This testimony, combined with the purchase of fentanyl just 72 hours prior, established a clear intent and a trial run for the final act. Kouri wasn't just lucky. She was learning from her mistakes. She realized the sandwich method was too obvious or inconsistent, so she allegedly moved to a liquid delivery system, the celebratory Moscow Mule. As detectives dug deeper into the financial records, the why became as clear as the how. Kouri was a woman living on a fiscal knife edge. Her real estate business, which she presented as a booming success, was a house of cards. She was carrying over $4 million in debt related to the unfinished 20,000 square foot mansion in Heber City. Eric had been the only thing standing between her and financial ruin. He had refused to sign for a new $2 million loan to fund her dream project. And just weeks before his death, he had discovered her secret siphoning of his funds. He was planning a divorce. And in Utah, a divorce meant Kouri would lose access to the masonry empire and the luxury lifestyle she craved. In her calculation, a dead husband was a payout. A divorced husband was a catastrophe. The investigation also highlighted the sheer audacity of Kouri's behavior. While she was under active investigation for homicide, she was suing Eric's family to seize his home. She was attempting to force Eric's sister to turn over the keys to the estate, claiming that her prenuptial agreement entitled her to everything. The audacity reached its peak when she published Are You With Me? To the detectives, the book wasn't just a children's story, it was a psychological artifact. It was proof of her ability to lie with a smile, to manipulate the grief of her children, and to market the death she had allegedly caused. Every interview she gave was cross-referenced with her search history and her text messages, creating a split-screen reality of a cold-blooded killer and a grieving widow author. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place with the analysis of the home's internet router and the smart locks. Kouri had told police she was sleeping in her son's room and didn't check on Eric until 3:20 a.m., but the digital logs showed that the master bedroom door had been opened and closed multiple times during the night. Her phone was active on the Wi-Fi, sending and deleting messages at 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. She was awake, she was active, and she was likely watching her husband take his last, shallow breaths. The performance of the 911 call was just that, a performance. By the time she dialed those 3 numbers, Eric was already long gone, his body cold. His story now belonging to the men and women in the crime lab. The elaborate facade of the grieving widow author finally crumbled on May 8, 2023, when the Summit County Sheriff's Office executed an arrest warrant that sent shockwaves through Utah. Kouri Richins was taken into custody and charged with first-degree aggravated murder and multiple counts of possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. The arrest was the culmination of a year-long investigation that had meticulously connected the fentanyl in Eric's system to the secret cash payments Kouri had made to her housekeeper. During the preliminary hearings, the courtroom was packed with Eric's family, who wore blue, his favorite color, as they watched the woman who had allegedly orchestrated his death face a judge. The prosecution laid out a devastating timeline of financial desperation and chemical pursuit, while Kouri's defense team argued that the evidence was entirely circumstantial. The case took another bizarre turn during her incarceration when a 6-page handwritten letter, dubbed the Walk the Dog letter, was discovered in her cell. In the letter, Kouri allegedly instructed her mother to tell her brother to lie in his testimony, suggesting a narrative where Eric had obtained the fentanyl himself from Mexico. This attempt at witness tampering only bolstered the prosecution's portrayal of Kouri as a master manipulator who would stop at nothing to control the narrative. While the trial has faced delays and a mountain of legal motions, the judicial process remains focused on the cold-blooded reality of the crime. Kouri remains held without bail, a stark contrast to the life of luxury and media tours she had envisioned. The legal battle over Eric's multi-million-dollar estate continues, but the woman who once wrote about healing is now the central figure in a story of absolute betrayal. The tragedy of the Richins family is more than a tale of financial greed. It is a profound exploration of the fragility of trust. The irony of the title, Are You With Me?, continues to haunt the people of Kamaz, as it now feels less like a message of comfort and more like a taunt from the woman who allegedly turned her children into orphans for a real estate flip. Kouri Richins crafted a story of a father who watched from the sky with angel wings, yet the evidence suggests she was the one who sent him there, hidden behind a copper mug and a practiced smile. Eric Richins was a man who lived by the permanence of stone, only to be taken by the silent, shifting shadows of betrayal in his own bedroom. Today, the vibrant children's book sits on shelves as a physical artifact of a lethal lie, a reminder that the most dangerous monsters aren't the ones in our closets, but sometimes the ones who tuck us in at night. The narrative Kouri wrote for the world has been replaced by a much darker truth. one that no colorful illustration can ever truly erase. If you are finished watching, you're a real true crime fan. Subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. See you in the next video.